Sanctum of Domination is hot off the press, and right now is the perfect time to get ahead of the competition. You might be wondering if anything has changed, and spoiler alert, it has. But we are here to help, because today we will be breaking down everything you need to know for setting up your Holy Paladin in Season 2. We're going to show you exactly what talents you should be using, how to gear, and all the macros you will need to crush 9.1. So sit back and enjoy this introduction to your Holy Paladin. Important changes to Holy Paladin in 9.1. First, the bad news. There were some damage nerfs across the board to every damaging spell, including Ashen Hallow for Venthyr players. This was entirely due to PvE, where Holy Paladins could do as much damage as a DPS on some fights. But on the bright side, every Paladin spec got an entirely new PvP talent option called Judgments of the Pure, which might be insanely broken in some matchups. This will cause Judgment casts to dispel magic, disease, and poison effects from nearby allies, including yourself. One potentially broken use of this will be to remove silence on yourself from Shadow Priests, since you can still use Judgment even when you can't cast spells. Two primary PvP talents were also changed, with Divine Favor giving less of a healing increase to Holy Light, nerfing the cooldown considerably. Light's Grace was changed to no longer stack, but giving a 15% damage reduction instantly and now buffing Flash of Light healing instead of Holy Light. These changes come with buffs to both healing spells, but seem to reinforce more usage of Flash of Light in Arena, which is a really mana inefficient spell. Overall, the patch really failed to address the biggest issues Holy Paladins have, being their mana. With Light's Grace now benefiting Flash of Light, Holy Paladins might struggle harder in longer games, but will still be one of the best aggressive and short game healers. With the patch recap out of the way, let's quickly cover the races you should be playing in 9.1, which haven't changed much since our last update. For Alliance, Human is still your best choice, since having a stun removal is really important as Holy Paladin. Being able to quickly break out of CC to use Blessing of Sacrifice or Blessing of Protection is central to your gameplay at all levels. Dwarf is an alternative option, though not nearly as strong, but with the rise in popularity of Assassination Rogues and Feral Druids, Stone Form will have higher value. On top of that, the increased crit multiplier from Might of the Mountain has a massive benefit due to the high crit chance of your healing spells. And that is also why Tauren is still the best race for Horde, since they also have an combined with the HP increase with Endurance, Tauren arguably has the strongest racial passives in the game. War Stomp is just a bonus at that point. Blood Elf is still good, but doesn't nearly have the same power level as Tauren. It is overall the more aggressive choice, especially in Holy Paladin mirrors, where Arcane Torrent can be used to quickly remove a Blessing of Protection from the enemy team. With that out of the way, let's go over your best talents for PvP in Season 2. Here we have a solid default build for most matchups in Arena. For the most part, you never want to change Bestow Faith, since it is the most efficient healing option on this tier, allowing you to gain Holy Power from max range. You also never want to swap out Saved by the Light, since it acts as a safety net in Arena, preventing you or your teammates from accidentally dying to sudden spikes in HP. Your third tier is where things get a bit more interesting. Fist of Justice is a solid neutral option and should be the default choice, unless you're playing as a melee cleave or any comp with multiple stun options, in which case Blinding Light might have more value. Repentance is probably the least used option on this tier, but works well with classes that have fear effects like Warlocks and Shadow Priests, and it even works exceptionally well in 2v2, where there are generally less interrupts to deal with. Your fourth tier is also really flexible and is super dependent on comp and playstyle, with Unbreakable Spirit being the safest option. Having a lower cooldown on Bubble is definitely worth it if games last long enough, but in shorter games, especially one Divine Steed will give you more opportunities to push in for stuns than your opponents. Rule of Law is probably the worst option on this tier and should really only be used if you plan to play super far in the backline, since it dramatically increases the range on all of your heals. You should never change your 5th and 6th tier, since Divine Purpose gives you stronger instant cast healing while also giving you more wings procs through Awakening. These two talents perfectly complement each other and are still the best in Season 2. Beacon of Faith is your best talent in almost every single 3v3 game, since you can use it to heal multiple targets while allowing Saved by the Light to act as a safety net on each target with Beacon. But in situations where you are 100% sure there will only be one kill target, then swap to Glimmer of Light, since it will give you more HPS for single target healing. Although some of your PvP talents were changed, your standard choices are pretty much the same. As far as a good default 3 are concerned, Divine Favor, Light's Grace, and Ultimate Sacrifice are all solid picks. Divine Favor gives you an additional healing cooldown, allowing you to avoid interrupts when instant heals aren't available. Light's Grace now grants 15% damage reduction instantly after using Holy Light, making your teammates much tankier through sustained damage. And finally, in a fast-paced meta with huge damage setups, Ultimate Sacrifice burst, you can swap out Ultimate Sacrifice for Blessed Hands, especially into melee cleaves, since it grants you 2 charges of Blessing and Protection, which will usually outweigh everything else. The new Judgments of the Pure talent is also a potential swap for Ultimate Sacrifice, specifically into Mage and Shadow Priest teams. It can be used to dispel your partners out of CC when Cleanse isn't available. Just be careful when using it against Affliction Warlocks and Elemental Shamans, since you can be killed with Unstable Affliction and Control of Lava. And speaking of dispelling, Cleanse the Weak is also a solid pick into Shadow Priests and Balance Druids, since it can AoE dispel dots from your team. Once again, just be careful when using it against Affliction Warlocks and Elemental Shamans, since you can be punished by over-dispelling. And finally, Hallowed Ground is a super niche pick into Frost DKs. This talent only gets value if you're playing aggressively on top of your teammates, using Consecrate as a way to passively remove snares. Since DKs have a bunch of slows, you usually get high value while playing this talent. 9.1 did cause some rebalancing to Covenants, including an expanded Soulbind system, but your best choice is still Kyrian going into Season 2. Divine Toll is still almost mandatory in Arena, since it gives you an additional instant cast heal while interacting with your main legendary, and since it is on the Arcane Spell School, it can even be used while locked out on Holy, giving you a reliable option for dealing with interrupts. We really don't see anything being better for Holy Paladin for the remainder of the expansion, unless there's a major rebalancing to all of the Covenants. And since you will be Kyrian for Season 2, you will need to pick a Soulbind. 9.1 did introduce some key nerfs to Forgelight Prime Mechanicos, specifically with a considerable nerf to Soul Steel Clamps, which now reduces the duration of stun and incapacitate effects by 15% down from 30. This was a massive we highly recommend using Pelagos for Season 2 since it has some really great abilities, including the newly added Path of the Devoted, which will be a great tool against any comp with spammable CC and stun setups, and the new end cap ability called Newfound Resolve, which will occasionally give you a 10% intellect boost for 15 seconds. The path we are currently showing can be changed depending on a few things. For one, you should drop Pure Concentration or Shielding Words if there aren't any fear effects on the enemy team. And on your second to last row, you can swap out Echoing Blessings for Royal Decree only if you are playing with the Reign of Endless Kings legendary. With that in mind, let's go over your best conduits for Season 2. For potency, Ringing Clarity is probably your most important conduit, since it can cause Divine important potency conduits, with Focused Light being a strong generalized option and Untempered Dedication being incredibly good in matchups where you are not the kill target. For Endurance, Divine Call and Shielding Words are both solid general options, while Royal Decree should only be used when you're playing with the Reign of Endless Kings legendary, otherwise it will have no value. For Finesse, Pure Concentration is mandatory in any matchup with a fear effect. This includes warrior teams, which is often overlooked by players who forget about Intimidating Shout. Otherwise, Echoing Blessings is your alternative selection, primarily due to its damage reduction on Blessing of Sacrifice. Gearing has changed slightly in 9.1, including the addition of some optional pieces from the new raid. All Season 2 PvP gear will now scale up to 13 eye levels anytime you are in Instance PvP, meaning your unranked Conquest pieces will have a base eye level of 220 and a PvP eye level of 233. Gear can still be upgraded based on ranking, up to rank 5 once you reach 2100 in any bracket. You will still need Honor to upgrade every piece, with weapons costing the most to upgrade. Now though, you will need to win at least one game to upgrade to the highest ranking available. For the most part, you should focus gearing primarily with Conquest points, getting capped every week, and then and as a reminder, your stat priority is still Intellect, then Versatility, Crit, Haste, and Mastery in that order. You should base your Conquest purchases based on whatever gives you the highest Intellect and Versatility increases, focusing on gear that has both Crit and Versatility. like Blessing of Sacrifice and Blessing of Protection. We highly recommend using an emblem trinket despite their nerfs in 9.1, since it gives you a huge increase to your primary stat and will give you an additional defensive cooldown when you get trained. If you want a more aggressive option, consider using the new Shackless Trinket, since it gives you your primary stat while having a super strong healing reduction. This pairs well with stun setups where you increase the pressure by preventing any healing on the kill target. There is some new PvE gear that you can get from Sanctum of Domination that has special sockets for new gems called Shards of Domination. These effects will be nerfed by 50% in PvP, so they aren't completely necessary in Arena. If you manage to get your hands on a piece of gear with a shard socket, just make sure it has versatility on it. Otherwise, your Conquest PvP gear is probably PvE gear. You won't need it to be competitive. If you get it, great. If you don't, well, no worries. Although there were some new Covenant-specific legendaries added in 9.1, your best option really hasn't changed. Shock Barrier is still your optimal choice in Season 2, once again having really good amount of absorption, giving you a pretty substantial bump in throughput compared to other legendaries. Absorption effects are super valuable overall in PvP, since they work both preemptively and reactively by instantly denying damage. If you want to experiment a bit, Inflorescence of Sunwell might be worth exploring in 9.1 due to buffs to Infusion of Light. These buffs dramatically ramp up your holy power generation when using holy in matchups where you can stand far in the back line, just casting Holy Light the entire game. As we mentioned throughout this guide, Reign of worth crafting in case you play a matchup where you know you will be trained to the ground, since this can prevent you from dying in setups. Finally, let's take a look at some of the macros you should be using in Season 2 and beyond. With the new addition of Judgments of the Pure, you might want to consider using a target macro for your Judgment so that you can use it to dispel while not having to deselect your teammates. And as a healer, we highly recommend using Party 1-2 macros for your dispel and your blessings. Do this by simply adding an @party command with an ability, binding Party 1 and 2 to separate keys. As far as your Hammer of Justice and Repentance are concerned, you could either make separate focus macros for each and Arena 1, 2, 3, or if you really want, you can do both. One isn't necessarily better than the other, and whatever is most comfortable for you is probably best. And there you have it. Holy Paladin healing has changed a bit in 9.1, but your strengths are largely the same. If this winds up being a really aggressive and fast meta, then Paladins might actually do pretty well, and we will be sure to update you on any future changes. As always, thanks for watching. See you soon.